Blog Talk Radio.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Franchise Interviews on this Thursday, July 24th, 2008, where we're asking the franchipreneur who owns one. I'm your host, Marty McDermott, and my co-host, Don Johnson of Diamond Financial Services, is taking a well-deserved vacation today. If you've ever dreamed about owning your own business, then you've certainly come to the right place. We have a great show today. You're going to hear a new addition to our website, Great Quotes in Franchising. Our show today is being brought to you by Franchise Interviews, LLC, and Diamond Financial Services. And Franchise Interviews gives you an up-close and behind-the-scenes look at franchising and entrepreneurship through our website, franchiseinterviews.com, where you can hear and read interviews, as well as get inside tips from some of the most successful sources in franchising. Our weekly franchise radio show on Blog Talk Radio, where each week you get to hear a new interview with franchisors, franchisees, franchise authors, franchise experts, and franchise attorneys. And our monthly franchise newsletter, which is a must-read for anyone looking to buy a franchise. And if you're looking for a loan to finance your franchise opportunity, Don Johnson, my co-host of Diamond Financial Services, can certainly help you out. But don't call Don today because I suspect he's on the beach with his family. Today's a special show because for the very first time in 80 shows, I have the mic to myself. And we started Franchise Interviews almost 2 years ago. And in that time, we've had some of the biggest names in franchising. There have also been some amazing quotes on our show during that time. The great thing about the podcast is if you don't have 60 minutes to listen to a whole show, you can go and listen to a podcast, Great Quotes in Franchising. And each podcast is typically 5 minutes in length and very, very enlightening. Before we play Great Quotes in Franchising, I want to give you our show schedule over the next month because we have a lot of exciting things happening during that time. On August 7th, we're meeting with 1-800-Radiators, Mr. Kelly Grace, who's the Vice President of Franchise Development for 1-800-Radiator. And 1-800-Radiator is one of the fastest growing franchises in North America. It's a very simple concept. 1-800-Radiator delivers brand new radiators within 2 to 3 hours of its local customers and next day to customers outside of the same day area. Very interesting concept. So again, tune in to that on August 7th, 2008. August 14th, we're meeting with franchise consultant Tom Scarta. Tom's a very interesting story. Tom was a regular guy who left the 9-to-5 world, promise of a pension and a gold watch, to explore his desire to follow his dreams and become an entrepreneur, and he did just that. So Tom's a wonderful speaker, and again, we're going to be having him on the show in several weeks as well. That's August 14th. August 21st, 2008, Franchise Author Symposium. This is the first time we're having a 2.5-hour show, and you're going to get to hear from franchise authors like Joe Matthews, Julie Bennett, Joe LaBava, and, of course, the legendary Michael Gerber. August 28th, we're meeting with Navis Franchise Opportunity, and Navis have packaged up an outstanding and interesting franchise. Discover the freedom of franchise ownership with Navis Pack and Ship. They're a commercial, not a retail franchise that dominates the exploding market for custom packaging and also shipping services. They specialize in packing and shipping of large, fragile, and valuable items. So tune into that on August 28th, 2008. Going into September, we're meeting with author Dr. Scott Shane, and we're going to talk about his most recent book, The Illusions of Entrepreneurship. And Dr. Scott talks about in the book, he shows the reality of entrepreneurship and kind of like the myths that are taking place in entrepreneurship as well. So you don't want to miss that show. Again, that's on September 4th. September 11th, we're meeting with Brian Spindell of the PostNet Franchise Opportunity. And with the rapid growth of small office, home offices here in the United States, because technology has provided us with the opportunity for many people to work from home, PostNet is certainly capitalizing on this niche in the market, or the growth or the trend, I should say. So you don't want to miss that show as well. PostNet does a lot of different things as well. They're into the whole copy and printing services, digital services. They also get into the packaging and shipping. And they have a bunch of other additional services that we're going to talk about as well. On September 25th, we have another fabulous Snell and Wilmer attorney, Holly Shilliday. And Holly is the third, as I mentioned, the third franchise attorney that we've had on the show from Snell and Wilmer. The first one was Kevin Hine, and next one was Scott Sandberg. And every time we've had those guys on the show, it's been nothing but informative. So you're going to want to hear that show. Interesting topic. Given today's economic conditions, many businesses are heading into financial troubles, such as bankruptcy. And Holly's going to talk about that topic. And again, we talk about everything on the show. The pluses of franchising, the negative aspects, who it's for, who it isn't for, all those different things, because we want to give people a full picture and really educate them on franchising. If you're just tuning in, again, today is a special show because I mentioned earlier, this is the first time in 80 shows I have the mic to myself. And we started Franchise Interviews almost 2 years ago, and in that time we've had some very big names in franchising. There have also been some amazing quotations, which was why we started a podcast a couple months ago called Great Quotes in Franchising. And the great thing about the podcast is if you don't have 60 minutes to listen to a whole show, you can listen to the podcast, Great Quotes in Franchising. You can hear that on franchiseinterviews.com. We also have links up on our show page on blogtalkradio.com as well. And again, each podcast is typically 5 minutes in length. Today you're actually going to get to hear 8 different podcasts, so don't leave at the end of each podcast. The show's not over. It's going to go into another podcast, and you're going to hear from some greats like George Nadeff, who's the founder of Boston Chicken, Julie Bennett. She just recently wrote a book for Franchise Times. The legendary Michael Gerber, and a bunch of others. So this is a must-listen to show. So I hope you enjoy it, and again, we'll see you next week with another edition of Franchise Interviews. So here we go. Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to Great Quotes in Franchising, where each podcast you get to hear a great quote in franchising. Don and I have been hosting Franchise Interviews now for the last year and a half, and in that time we've done about 80 shows. We've interviewed some of the top franchisors, franchisees, franchise experts in the country, and it's just been an incredible experience. Each show, Don and I have learned something, and there's usually typically 2 or 3 learning lessons from each radio program. The podcast that you're going to get to hear today, or the Great Quote in Franchising, is from Dan Castellini, and you're also going to get to hear from John Hewitt, who is also the founder of Liberty Tax Service, and he talks about his most successful franchisees. But listen to what Dan says as far as taking a self-assessment and typically the people who become the most successful franchisees. I really thought it was a great learning lesson. So here we go.
And they send a picture in. We don't even know about it. Next thing we see our picture, a Lady Liberty featured in the USA Today or somewhere in the country where we didn't even do anything except do our jobs and put our Lady Liberties out.
That's great. Now, the Lady Liberty, was that your idea, John, or was that yours, Dan?
I asked Dan, and remember, I already said he's one of the best 10 or 20 ever out of 3,000. So I built him up, and this is not a slam to Dan at all. But I often ask my top people just to make other people understand. They said, Dan, what did you create? What did you invent? When you've been here 4 seasons. What did you do different? And he said, really, the top people say, you know what, I followed the plan, and I think Dan can confirm that.
That's the best franchisee, John. That's what Marty and I speak about a lot. A lot of our experts we've had on, trying to recruit people, don't want to reinvent the wheel, just follow the system and work hard and have that passion. In most franchises, you got to be people, a people person, and you're gonna be successful. Is the bottom line.
Absolutely. Dan's comment. What's that? How do you feel about that?
No, absolutely. I think that went back when I was looking, deciding if franchising was right for me. That's the first thing I determined was, you know what? I don't want to invent anything. I'm not creative. Just give me a plan that I can execute. Of course, then you go in search of that plan, and that's exactly what Liberty has. And to succeed, you guys hit the nail on the head. It's simply, have that personal drive, and then the ability to listen and execute the plan that you signed up to follow.
Right. Getting solid training.
I love that quote from Dan Castellini, how he says, he took a real honest self-assessment. He says, you know what, I'm not a creative person. I don't want to invent anything. And, again, I just want to follow the system. And, again, typically, this is what we found to be the most successful franchisee, somebody who is just willing to follow the system. So, again, this is our first great quote in franchising and our first podcast. It's kind of historic, so we'd love to hear your feedback as we get into the whole world of podcasting now. We think this is going to be a great additional service to our listeners because, again, our shows are very detailed. They're typically, as you know, for our listeners, 60 minutes in length. So what Don and I would like to do is kind of highlight some great quotes from each show. So if you don't have 60 minutes to hear the show, you can go and listen to the podcast and listen to some highlights or some great learning lessons in franchising. So we hope you enjoy this one. Again, we'd love to hear your feedback, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon with another great quote in franchising from Franchise Interviews. Take care, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising, where each podcast you get to hear a great quote in franchising. And today's podcast is being brought to you by Diamond Financial Services. And if you're looking for a loan to finance your franchise, simply click the Diamond Financial Services logo below. Today's podcast, you're going to get to hear from a legend in entrepreneurship and franchising, and that's Michael Gerber. And we've had Michael on the show 2 times up to this point, and the first time we had him on the show, Don and I were amazed at the amount of emails we received and listeners, and it was really overwhelming and incredibly fun at the same time. One of the questions that we commonly ask on every show is, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to buy a franchise? And naturally, Michael's response was brilliant. So here we go. Franchising and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, I think before that, Mike, I think a lot of people listening might be a little surprised that your mom still tells you what to do.
No, that's the problem. My mom has never told me what to do. She inspires me to do things that I never thought about doing.
Absolutely. That's great. That's tremendous. Yeah. What advice would you give to a prospective franchisee looking to buy a franchise, Michael?
Well, first of all, understand what you want. It has less to do with the franchise than it does with you. What is it truly important to you to do? This whole new emergence of the Dreaming Room, for example, really revolves around the idea that struck me that this is the age of the new entrepreneur. And the new entrepreneur is very, very much different than the one who preceded him. The new entrepreneur is more interested in a business that has meaning, not just money. So the whole question for the new entrepreneur or the one who wants to buy a franchise is really, so what's the meaning of this? What's the impact of this on the world? When we begin to look at the world and really realize that the world is in dreadful shape, you wonder then how I, in a business of my own, could have some kind of impact that would add value to the world. So I'd begin to look at franchises from that perspective. What's the value of the franchise? Presuming that I'm going to be successful, what is the value? What do I deliver that has value to my customer? What pride do I get from what it is I'm doing? What am I adding of benefit to the world as opposed to subtracting from the world, presuming, again, I'm going to be successful? So the first thing is, what does this company mean? What is the true meaning of this, and what's the impact and import of it? For me in my life, I'm going to die one day, and I'm going to probably die inside my business. And what I'd like to ask myself is, will I be proud of the fact that I devoted the rest of my life to doing this?
Right.
Would I want to say this to people I love? Would I want to say this to my kids? What am I going to say to them when I describe what I've chosen to do with the years of my life that I'm going to do it in? Because, in fact, you're going to spend the rest of your life in this business or in something very much like it. The second thing I would ask, once I've decided that, yes, this is a worthy thing to do for me, a human being, how organized is this thing that I'm going to do? How organized is it? Does it have a truly kick-ass breakthrough system for doing what it needs to do, which is attract people to it as customers, which is convert those people into active customers and paying customers, and ability to convert those customers into clients, meaning they come back again and again and again and again. So I want to build or buy that capability, or I'm going to then need to build it for myself.
Wow. It's a great. We've been asking that question now since we started the show, Michael. We never got such a great response.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so really, don't jump into anything quickly. Do your due diligence, and that's a good point. I mean, this might be something you've been doing for a long time. Are you going to be proud of telling people this is what you do?
Proud, yeah.
I mean, Marty, you and I have talked about people just can't jump into something that sounds great. They got to
exactly
do
but they have to go more deeply into their own motivation.
Right.
And that's the thing that's missing almost all the time. Essentially, the prospective franchisee, the guy, the woman who decides they want to buy a business opportunity, essentially they go out there, and the one who pitches the deal the best gets the deal. And I'm essentially saying it's got to turn around the other way. The one who's going out becomes more thoughtful about what I'm looking for, as opposed to simply going out and looking for a good business to run.
Right, absolutely.
So that right there might be a strong characteristic of a.
Those are very deep words from Michael. He's talking about the whole, what is this franchise going to mean? How do I want to be remembered? So, again, it's going very deep into that question, but again, it's one of the best responses I think we've had up to this point. And again, it is Michael Gerber. He's sold millions of copies. His latest book is Awakening the Entrepreneur Within, and we had Michael on the show several months ago, and we spoke about the book. And again, he's going to be in Great Quotes and Franchising on several occasions. It was hard to decide which one we were going to use first, but this was it. So again, you're going to see Michael again in a couple other editions of Great Quotes and Franchising. That day that we did the show, following us, actually became a friend to the show, Ken Six, who hosts a show called Arbor Talk with Peter Felix. And Ken was also a big fan of Michael Gerber. Here was Ken's reaction following the show. And again, we'll leave you with that, and we'd love to hear your feedback on this edition of Great Quotes and Franchising, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Here we go.
Get Marty back on the line. I think that was Michael Gerber on his show. That was Michael Gerber. I tell him to call in. That guy he wrote the email, and he did. We need Marty to come in for about a minute. Yeah. That's a very good idea. Let me work on that. If you're listening, Marty, call us up. All right, we'll do. All right, we'll be right back.
Thanks again for everyone for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising, where each podcast you get to hear a great quote in franchising. Today you're going to get to hear from a legend in franchising. It was about 6 months ago, Don and I were celebrating our 1-year anniversary of doing the radio show, and we put a lot of thought as far as who we'd like to have for a guest that particular day. And Don and I both agreed that that person should be George Nadeff, and Mr. Nadeff graciously accepted. For those of you who don't know George Nadeff, he's tagged as the guru in franchising. He's also the founder of Boston Chicken. He had a lot of great quotes that show. This is just George gives his advice to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to buy a franchise. Here we go.
Mr. Nadeff, about the characteristics that make a successful no-fat franchisee.
Well, I've always told people to play to their strengths. if you have a personality you know is not a charming one, don't get into the service business where you have to interact with people. Because people business requires personality. So, you're not asking someone to do something that's against their grain. So when looking for a franchise, a person should consider the things that they've succeeded in. For instance, if they've been a coach of a soccer team and they had to inspire the kids to run down that field and kick that ball and win, there's something about that individual that is inspiring. So he should look for something that maybe can be along those same lines, that he can use those talents of his. If he's been a teacher, he's been a person that's worked with his hands. In other words, always play to your strength. Don't go into something that's opposite of your personality. That will cause a little bit of a problem. Of course, most companies offer training, but if you put a glove on, it should fit neatly in between the fingers. It shouldn't be something that once you put the glove on, you can't bend your fingers. It's as simple as that. So when you're buying a franchise, it should fit.
And I guess no fat specifically. Do you have a checklist you go down that you want each franchisee to be, or sometimes it's just having a feeling of a certain person?
It's clearly a financial issue. They have to have, in our case, pretty close to the ability to finance something between $500,000 and $600,000. So if an individual can't do that, then maybe he should look for other franchises like a Subway or a Quiznos or other that are around the $200,000. So again, here we talk about fitting something that fits their pocketbook and not get into something that's way over their head and put themselves in financial jeopardy by starting in something that is too hard for them to overcome. So again, it should fit their wallet just like it should fit their personality.
Right, absolutely.
And you've, of course, been involved with so many franchisees with all your different businesses that you've done. Have there been times over the years that you sort of took a chance on someone that you weren't really sure, but you really liked them, and it's worked out? I'm sure you have a couple success stories.
Yeah, there have been those cases. And again, there have been the opposite. And again, you learn by doing the thing. I would much prefer to tell a person that he's not qualified than qualified. And the rationale behind that, of course, is that I don't want to get somebody into something that he's not qualified for. There are so many franchise selections out there that if a person's doing their research, it allows them the opportunity to really, really take the time and investigate. And most of these companies already have franchises in place. They can pick up the phone and call up the franchisee and say, how you doing? What kind of work did you do before you bought this franchise? Tell me about why you chose it. Would you do it again? I mean, this is a great opportunity as opposed to starting something on your own where you don't know whether you'll ever get the first base. Franchising in the beginning is very much like a baseball game. If you can buy third base as opposed to getting to first base, and getting to first base by starting your own business, maybe you'll get the first base, but there's no guarantee. But if you can buy a franchise, you at least can get the third base. That's good baseball. And when you get the third base, your chances of getting home is a lot easier than being on first.
Wow, that's a great analogy, isn't it, Don?
Yeah, and it sounds like you're a Red Sox fan.
Thank you very much.
I love that quote from Mr. Nadeau where he says that, franchising is like a baseball game and it gives you the ability to start on third base. So, again, this is our second podcast, and, again, we'd love to hear your feedback, and we'll see you again soon for another great edition of Franchise Interviews and Great Quotes in Franchising. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising, where each podcast you get to hear a great quote in franchising. And today's podcast is being sponsored by Diamond Financial Services, and Diamond Financial is the nation's #1 source for business loans with over 50 years of combined experience and established relationships. Financing solutions can be applied to business acquisitions, franchise purchasing or startups, building and leasehold improvements or expansions, equipment purchases, debt restructuring, working capital, franchise fees, or simply the buying out of partners. And if you want more information on Diamond Financial Services, you can click their logo right on our show page of this podcast. Today's great quote in franchising is by Dr. Robert Needham of Franchise Inc. And Dr. Robert Needham is also a franchise author. And we had him on our show, it was about a month ago. And typically on the show we'll ask, what advice would you give to an aspiring entrepreneur looking to buy a franchise? And I thought his answer was brilliant, so here we go. Another question we'd like to ask someone like yourself, Dr. Needham, is what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to buy a franchise?
Well, first of all, it's interesting. I believe they have to first find out who they are. Meaning, are they prepared to work with employees? If not, then they don't need to be buying a business that's going to have a lot of employees. They need to be in a business that's maybe just them or maybe one or two others. Right. Once they do that, they really need to decide what it is they want this business to do. We have a lot of people call us and say, my wife's a great cook. I want to run a restaurant. Right. But there's a big gap between being a great cook and being a restaurateur. Right. And so what we do is we try to find out what they really, the old saying, I believe, I don't know who actually gets credit for originally quoting it. It's certainly not me, but the old saying that people don't buy drills because they want drills, they buy drills because they want holes.
That's right, yeah.
What we try to do is find out what is it that they really want, and the franchise is just the vehicle to get them to their dream. So often when we're talking with them, we find out that it's freedom or financial independence, which, is really freedom still. And they really want to be able to control their own destiny or some of those kind of things. So then we start looking at the business, and we start explaining the business from that direction, and it's really independent of what the business does, because there is no perfect business, as you know. Every business has something that's not great about it, and every business has something that's super fantastic about it, and we try to help them understand those various things.
That's interesting. We had a couple guests a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Needham, from Fish Window Cleaning. There was two young gentlemen. They worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car for many years, and they were very frustrated. They were working 50, 60 hours a week, I think it was, Don, they were mentioning. Right. And they were surprised at first. They ended up in the window cleaning business. They said in a million years they never imagined buying that kind of franchise, but it just match what they were looking to do. They just wanted flexible hours where they can get home early and spend weekends with their family and things like that.
Right. They did a lot of due diligence, and a lot of questions and points of what they wanted in a franchise system, and that met most or maybe all of what they were looking for.
Right, and they're very happy now, So, but yeah, it was just interesting. They never pictured it in a million years.
One of our top female consultants was regional.
I love that quote from Dr. Needham. It's a famous quote. It says, people don't buy drills because they need a drill. People buy a drill because they need a hole. And, the same thing applies to franchising. People don't buy a franchise simply to buy a franchise. People buy a franchise as a means to an end where they want more freedom or they want to spend more time with their family. So, once again, another great quote in franchising. So, again, we hope you enjoyed this podcast. And once again, we'd love to hear your feedback, and we'll see you again soon for another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising by Franchise Interviews. Take care, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising, where each podcast you get to hear a great quote in franchising. Today you're going to get to hear from Nick Bibby of the Bibby Group, and Nick wrote a fantastic article a while back called Entrepreneurial Types. Listen to what Nick had to say. I thought it was brilliant.
Back on what you said. If you don't have the perseverance, you won't persevere.
Right.
Right, absolutely.
And oftentimes, too much money is the enemy.
Sure.
Right, you got to have the motivation. Keep going.
That's key. That's the number one.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was something I wanted to go back to, Nick. You wrote a great article that I read. It was called Entrepreneurial Types, and you identified the different types of entrepreneurs. You started with an intrapreneur and ended with a practical visionary. Do you want to talk a little bit about that or touch upon that? Because I thought it was a great article.
Oh, thank you. If you look at entrepreneurship again on a scale of with independence as the key element on the scale, And one entrepreneurial type, in my mind, is not better than another. It's simply who we are and where we best fit. Well, you know, the safest entrepreneurial setting is intrapreneurship, where you're operating, and I'm sure your listeners understand all this, you're operating within the framework of a company. There's a very limited risk factor. The further you move out on the scale of independence, the more alone you are.
Certainly.
So the next logical step would be what? Franchisee. And I've often used this expression regarding the very finest of franchisees. It's an attitude of help me but leave me alone.
Sure.
And so, you know, I can define each entrepreneurial type with a given definition, and that's, again, part of the focus program, helping people decide really who they are.
Right.
And this is quite a lengthy process. When I say that the focus program is a no-fluff program, it takes time and effort to understand ourselves. I'm simply providing a framework and tools so that people can move through the process of understanding their entrepreneurial self.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
And by the way, the answer to you, at the very end, when I say practical visionary, I always put a question mark after that.
Yes, I remember that.
And the reason is, you know, a vision may not be very practical at all. And oftentimes when the visionary pursues a dream, it's not about the marketplace. It's about them proving something.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. We have about 1 minute, Nick.
I thought that was a fantastic article. You can actually read the whole article by going to bibigroup.com. Again, that's bibigroup.com, and it's under articles, and again, it's called Entrepreneurial Types. So once again, we hope you enjoyed this edition of Great Quotes in Franchising, and again, we'd love to hear your feedback, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising. You know, Don and I have been hosting Franchise Interviews now for about a year and a half, and in that time, we've gotten to interview some fantastic authors on the topic of franchising. One of my favorite books is The Franchise Times Guide to Selecting, Buying, and Owning a Franchise. It's a must-read in franchising, and that book is by Julie Bennett. And we had Julie on the show. It was about 3 to 4 months ago. She had some fantastic quotes on the topic of franchising. She spoke about the importance of following a system. She gave a great example of that. She even got into characteristics of successful franchisees. So listen to what Julie said.
And as for the systems, there's a great story from Becky Portjohn. In the book, she's an express personnel franchisee in Dayton, Ohio. And she says, follow the system. If the procedures manual said to write all reports with my left hand in red ink on Monday through Wednesday, and with my right hand in black ink on Thursday and Friday, I do it. I will follow everything because it works.
That's very powerful. I mean, that really describes franchising in a nutshell, Julie.
Doesn't it?
Absolutely.
That kind of reminded me, Marty, of that. Who was the client we had on? You know,
Julie, we had Liberty Tax. We had one of Liberty Tax's most successful franchisees on the show, and he basically said the same thing. He said he wasn't a creative person. You know, all he wanted to do was just, you know, follow the system, and that's why he became one of the most successful franchisees for Liberty Tax. That's all he did. He said all I did was what they told me to do, and I achieved this great success. You know.
You know, with the attitude, his whole attitude was like, just tell me what I have to do. Kind of like what you were just bringing up with that particular story, Julie. And that was his whole attitude. Tell me what to do. I'll do it. I'll work hard, and he's doing quite well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It's often, if you talk to a franchisor and say, why did that franchisee fail, he'll always say, well, he didn't follow the system.
Absolutely.
Which of course, that may or may not be true.
Right, absolutely. Julie, what types of characteristics do you think make successful franchisees?
Well, you were talking about one of the big ones, which is being hardworking.
Right.
And I think that's very important. You have to be enthusiastic about the business. You have to create an excitement before the business opens. You have to go through your community, tell them you're opening up, and get them in there the first day.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to hire, discipline, and motivate employees. There are personality tests that franchisors give franchisee candidates.
Right.
And when I took all three, I flunked them.
Isn't that something?
on this very point, because they said I'd be too empathetic to my franchisee, to my employees,
right.
and they'd walk all over me.
That's something.
That's a very important point. You have to have good communication skills. You have to be talking up your franchise all the time.
Right.
You have to have a sense of humor.
Sure.
And I'll go back to Becky Courtjohn, who said that she had an angry client call her up and say, that young lady you sent over here to work is painting her toenails at our reception desk. And Becky didn't miss a beat. She said, what color?
That's something. That's great, isn't it?
Isn't that perfect?
That's
you
fantastic.
have to roll with the punches.
Absolutely. Right. That's great.
And also, as you said before, you have to be well capitalized.
Sure.
So many franchises have to close in that first year because they don't have the money to keep going.
True.
Yeah, I come across that every day as we're pre-qualifying people for financing, Julie. And a lot of times we're trying to tell people to sometimes not fund the whole business themselves. They'll never be as strong a borrower as they are now. Kind of leverage yourself, get that working capital, which is a nice part of getting a loan. So you have that first 3 to 6 months of expenses paid for. But that happens a lot. People don't want to get a business loan. They finance it themselves, and 6 months later they're looking around for money. And
Right. Don't drain your house of home equity now.
Right. I love that quote from Becky Courtjohn that Julie referenced on the importance of following a system. So again, thanks for listening to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising. And once again, we'd love to hear your thoughts as we now enter the world of podcasting. So again, thanks, and we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising, where each podcast you get to hear a great quote in franchising. Today's podcast is being brought to you by Diamond Financial Services. And Diamond Financial is the nation's #1 source for business loans with over 50 years of combined experience. Financing solutions can be applied to business acquisitions, franchise purchasing or startups, building and leasehold improvements or expansions, equipment purchases, debt restructuring, working capital, franchise fees, or buying out of partners. Today's great quote in franchising comes from Carol Mercurio of Matchpoint. And Carol had excellent advice to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to buy a franchise. And one of the things that they should consider is image. Listen to what Carol said. I thought it was brilliant.
You want to talk a little bit about status?
Yeah, it's one of my favorites because, a lot of the franchising concepts are not high status.
Right.
If you look at some of these categories, and then there's others, where you'll find there's more of an executive model. And that becomes an issue with people depending on what their background and experience is and what are you willing to give up to have a business on your own and how important is status to you. And the way I break it down is if you were at a neighbor's for dinner and somebody asked you what you did for a living, how important is your answer?
That's interesting.
And for some people, it's very important. And when you go through this process with a lot of people, it really comes down to what's more important, what's on your business card or what's on your deposit slip.
Right.
And, I always use the example of, I would say the most common answer to things that people wouldn't do that are relative to status is I wouldn't pick up garbage.
Right.
It's kind of an interesting answer because if you look at that industry of the trash industry or garbage industry, there isn't probably one person out there that doesn't have trash.
Exactly.
Or doesn't know somebody that has trash.
Right, absolutely.
So, you have to think about what are you willing to do if the industry is probably one of the biggest and best industries that everybody needs. It's recession resistant, internet proof, that would be trash. And, of course, I always throw this little bit of humor into this equation here that my husband's in the trash business and has been for many, many years. And I live in New Jersey with an Italian last name, so I suppose
there you go, stereotype.
You know, be very careful how you deal with me. But, of course, if they don't get that humor, it's not very funny. But what you really want to think about is, you know, how do you feel about negotiating deals with CEOs or presidents of companies, or are you okay with dealing with, you know, the everyday consumer, or dealing directly to the consumer, or should it be business to business? Because there are different franchises that fit into those categories, or even if you look at retail, so that it may not be visible to the consumer, but there are retail businesses that will do business to business, deal with other business owners, as well as the consumer, which is a major plus because you have two ends of dealing with business rather than being limited to one. But you really have to determine, you know, what is it? If you want a high-status business, then that will put me in a direction that would be very different than a Dunkin' Donuts, for example.
Right.
Although some people would put some of these food concepts into high status. I'm not sure why, but I do believe that people's perception of food is a higher status.
That's interesting.
But there are certainly a lot of things you can do that go outside food that, you know, you can be a consultant in different areas that would be more executive-type models, or with a lot of the franchises, if you're looking for an executive-type model, it may be in a traditional type of business, but you become the manager of that business as opposed to getting your hands dirty every day. So you can still develop that into more of an executive model.
Right.
And, you know, what kind of products or services do you want to offer your public? Because that may limit some of the things that you look at if you shy away from certain industries.
Interesting.
But it is something that you really want to think about, you know, how important is status. And, you know, I always use the household cleaning industry as an example of that as well. You know, it's a very big business today. You know, it's a business that's changed through the years because of dual-income families, that it almost becomes a necessity rather than a luxury. But a lot of people will be embarrassed to say that I clean toilets for a living.
Right.
And the perfect example in that industry, when you look at the business model, it's not about cleaning toilets at all, because that's not what you do.
Right.
It's about sales, marketing, and management.
Exactly.
So again, you're looking at what is the business model itself. So put the industry aside, look at the model and how's that going to work in your community.
Such a good question, though, Carol. People,
really is.
sometimes it's everything they're thinking about with investing in a business is when you tell people at a party, what do you do? I mean, that's a great question. People don't want to
It is a great question, and if you really think about it,
yeah.
You know, I would say, you know, the common denominator with people when you have a discussion is what do you do for a living? And when I tell people I'm self-employed, it doesn't matter what I do. I think they're impressed with the fact that I own my own business. So I think business ownership in itself brings a certain level of prestige, because there's so many people out there that I think would want to own a business, but they don't have the courage to do it. So they admire somebody that does.
There's a pretty popular, fast-growing franchise that involves, it's pet waste removal.
Right. It's a big
myself, when I saw that, I'm like, do I want to tell people that I do that for a living? And, you know, I thought about that when I saw that type of franchise that, you know, a lot of people are pet owners, and that's the type of service that's needed.
Right.
I guess it takes a special type of person to.
and they're making a lot of money doing it.
Exactly. Right.
If you could put the status issue aside.
Right.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, to kind of summarize what we've spoken about, you know, all these different characteristics are things that you really need to write down and think about and put on a piece of paper. And if you put it all down and you start figuring out your likes and your dislikes,
I thought that was great advice from Carol, taking status into consideration. We've never heard that out of 80's show, so I thought that was fantastic advice. So, once again, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Great Quotes in Franchising by Franchise Interviews. And again, we'd love to hear your feedback, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising, where each podcast you get to hear a great quote in franchising. And today's podcast is being sponsored by the guys at Diamond Financial Services. And if you're looking to finance your franchise, just simply click the sponsorship button below of Diamond Financial, and you'll get some great information. today's podcast comes from Jim Cohen, who is the founder of Franchise Perfection. Jim had a great quote. He had actually a bunch of great quotes when we had him on the show. He's been involved in franchising almost 25 years now. He said most people know what they like, but they don't necessarily know what would be the best franchise opportunity for them. In other words, and we've referenced this on the show before, there's many people that like Dunkin' Donuts coffee. I'm a big fan of Dunkin' Donuts, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'd make a great franchisee. And the same thing applies to Subway or McDonald's or whatever that may be. So listen to what Jim had to say. I thought he gave some great advice to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to buy a franchise.
Fits in with your particular situation and what your desires are.
Interesting.
Then you have kind of a recipe for success.
Right. Do you find a lot of people really don't know what they want, Jim, or like they think they have an idea, like they say to you, they'll approach you and say, I want to buy a Dunkin' Donuts, and the only reason they want to buy a Dunkin' Donuts is because they like the coffee or the donuts, but do you get a lot of that where people really don't know what match they'd be appropriate for?
Yeah, no, great point. I mean, most people know what they like.
Right.
But they don't necessarily know what would be a good business. And they say to I hear all kinds of things. I mean, one of the things I hear all the time is, I don't care, I just want to make some money.
Right.
You hear that, and then you hear other things is I really want to do something special. I want to help people. Right. Or I want to use my expertise or my skills and get involved in a business that's going to make me feel great about myself. So everybody has different sort of goals and aspirations or visions of how they see themselves in a business opportunity.
Right.
And what I try to do is identify the key elements of what's important to them and the key elements of their particular situation, and then match them up with something that makes sense, or at least has some of the key elements, and then they can investigate those opportunities. It's a process. It's not an event.
Right, absolutely. I have a lot of people say to you, I've never even thought of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Interesting. And, I never thought of that again. And, and then they start thinking about it, and then all these questions start happening. And the reality is that sometimes it takes a process of investigating a number of opportunities before you identify the opportunity that makes the most amount of sense for you. And one of the things I've learned over the years is the people who do investigate thoroughly are the ones that have the most control of their destiny, because they have the most amount of information and have answered the most amount of questions. So due diligence is a very important part of being successful as a franchisee.
Yeah, I would agree. We've stressed that a lot on previous shows. Yeah, it's a good point, Jim.
Yeah, so, and some people don't know the questions to ask, but they learn as they go through the process, and that's what I try to do, is coach them and find the questions, because ultimately what matters is them getting involved in a business opportunity or a franchise opportunity that they feel